Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition was released 4 years ago on November 14, 2019. At that time, much of the community came from Vooblian HD Edition, though there are plenty of people playing the game for the first time as well. Though newcomers didn't have a reference point for complaining about new things introduced in the new Definitive Edition, veterans did. One of the major complaints was how units were hard to distinguish. Yes, they do look a bit different than the old models, and cool-looking units such as the Knight and Two-Handed Swordsman got a subjective downgrade, but after 4 years of getting used to the new models, this complaint seemed a bit silly. It's very easy to differentiate between all of the units at this point. Another issue was the sounds. The new sound effects just didn't have the same kind of impact as the older sounds. It's like you expected your units to make one sound, and then they make a weaker sounding version of that sound. You can hear this especially with Siege. There is a mod for the old sound effects, so some people use that these days, but honestly, the old sounds don't really match the new graphics in my opinion, so I just keep to the DE defaults for this. A third issue was the UI. Compared to Vooblian HD Edition, where we had to create lobbies for everything, matchmaking allowed us to easily queue for a match without much effort. This was great for 1v1s, but for team games, not being able to create a ranked lobby meant less interaction within the community, as you'd always get matched with strangers. Add on the fact that you can't send a message to anyone in-game, and unless you've added someone on another platform, there was no way to contact people you wanted to play with again. I'm pretty sure that your party at least wouldn't disband after each game like it does currently though. Oh, and you also had no way to check anyone's elo without using AoE2.net, so it was very difficult to make balanced lobbies anyways. At least these days you can just hover people's profile icons to see their stats. In addition to lobby issues, there were tons of bugs in the menus that I won't get into here, but some of them still remain, such as the search function not really working. Another thing that some people didn't like was the new main menu lost a lot of the charm that the original had. In the original, the menu items were all signs on shops in the background, and it looked pretty cool. The newer menu just had a list of buttons that you could click, which was much less interesting. This first DE menu actually wasn't the worst though. About a year into DE's life, they decided to redesign the menu a bit for some reason, so instead of clicking once to get to matchmaking, you had to click twice, which is the current method. In the 2019 menu, saved games were also not hidden behind the single player menu, but instead a separate button on the main menu. Currently, you have to go single player, load game, and then select your replay that you want to play. It's really convoluted, and the previous system made a lot more sense. The newer menu was definitely a step back in terms of user experience, and it's a shame it hasn't been changed again. On the topic of matchmaking, originally there was a map pool that the devs chose, and you got no favorites or bans. This meant that you'd randomly get a map out of the 7 or so available. Since longtime fans were used to being able to always play their favorite maps, people definitely got upset that they were being forced to play maps that they didn't want to play. This would eventually lead to Alt F4ing, aka closing the game and then reloading, so that people could try to get the map that they wanted. Originally, all players would have to restart their queue from 0 seconds, but these days if somebody dodges the queue, it keeps the timer going. The longer the queue is, the wider the elo range it searches for, and the more likely you are to find a match. Having to restart at 0 seconds because my opponent dropped was a huge waste of time. Also, there was no punishment for leaving the queue, so oftentimes you'd match up with the same person again, and they'd just drop again if their favorite map didn't show up. In that regard, the system is better now, but I still think it's nowhere near perfect. Having a much larger map pool with unlimited bans might lead to longer queues for 1v1 Alpine Lakes enjoyers, but it would improve the matchmaking experience for the vast majority of players. Everything we've talked about so far hasn't been all that important to gameplay. It's been more to show that the game has changed quite a lot since launch, and it's often that some things get better and some things get worse. The same can be said for pathing. One patch, they might fix units freezing randomly, but then they introduce units sliding across the screen with no collision on anything. There's rarely a patch where pathing feels overall better. Despite everything, Definitive Edition was destined to take over as the primary way to play Age of Empires 2 for one simple reason: the server-based multiplayer system. This meant that instead of the game being a laggy mess, especially when playing against people across the world or with someone with a bad internet connection, the game ran with very little lag. This meant that the game felt instantly much smoother to play, which pretty much overshadowed any of the issues with the game. A responsive game with a few bugs here and there is leagues ahead of a game with 400 milliseconds of delay after each action. This new game had that nostalgic feeling that older players could recognize, while also having a more modern feeling to it, and this ended up being the perfect recipe for success. For a long period in the early stages of Definitive Edition, melee units just wouldn't engage properly. They'd simply bump into other units in front of them, with maybe one or two in the front attacking. This was the main issue that people had. Villagers would also get stuck while taking resources a lot, but that was kind of in the original game as well, so it was expected. With that said, let's take a look at some old clips and compare them to the current patch. Alright, so starting off, we have initial movement from dispersed armies. So what that means is we have some knights, we have some two-handed swordsmen. In the HD edition, let's take a look at how they move. So they walk towards the location that you click right away. The knights speed up a little bit. We had one straggler in the back, but it's all good. Now look in DE. They kind of go behind the outpost and then they go forward. So they regroup way further back than they really need to. And so we'll see why that becomes an issue in some of these future clips. Next up, we have movement when changing direction. So you can see that in the HD edition, when you change direction, the front line actually changes. So it's like the front knights become the back knights, and the back knights become the front knights. They just do a little rotation, and then they're off to the races. They move in the correct direction that you want them to. Whereas if we take a look in DE, you can see that the front line never changes. It's always those same 4 knights. And what that means is that when you change direction, that front line has to get all the way to the back line, and that takes a bit more time. So anytime that you want to change direction, it just takes longer for your units to move, and that just makes the units feel a lot less responsive. So when you're trying to change direction, it's like your units just don't even go in the direction that you want right away. And so, yeah, it's just not a very good feeling compared to the older version of the game. Here's a test for splitting away knights from the group. We have two-handed swordsmen and knights. What we want to do is we want to issue a movement command with both unit types, and then split off the knights. Maybe the knights need to go pick off some siege. Maybe they need to go do something else. We split off the knights. The two-handed swordsmen continue to walk forward. The knights continue to walk forward, but they go a bit faster because they move a little bit faster. So, hey, makes sense, right? Like that's how it should work. It looks pretty good. The knights just go straight forward. Two-handed swordsmen fall in behind. Nice. Working perfectly back in HD edition. Now let's see in DE. What happens in DE? We click them forward. They like go off to the side a little bit. Two of the knights bug out a little bit. And somehow the two-handed swordsmen are just barely behind the knights. It's like the knights, they gain a little bit of distance, but in the previous one, in the HD edition, the knights are so much further ahead. Again, we tried again. Two of the knights go backwards. The two-handed swordsmen, they're just like still barely behind the knights. Even though they're so much slower of a unit, somehow the knights just really don't go forward very fast. And again, we do it again. Two knights bug out. So let's take a look at changing directions with multiple unit types. We have both unit types here. And look, the knights, they speed up to go to the other side, because knights are faster than two-handed swordsmen. So they speed up until they get into formation on the other end. Makes a lot of sense, right? It's like, yeah, you're changing directions. You want the knights in front because that's just how formations work. And yeah, the knights, they speed up to go to the other side. Beautiful. Now in DE, knights do not speed up to go to the other side, and they just feel so sluggish. It just feels like you have a liquid army. It's just, it's like honey. They're moving super, super slow. The knights don't speed up at all, so it just feels like when you're trying to change directions with multiple units, they regroup backwards, and you just can't change directions. You try and change directions, and they have to do this little regroup thing first before going back. And yeah, it's just not a very good feeling, honestly. So next up is grouping both unit types together, issuing a movement command. So what is this? This is just both units. You want to be getting your whole army to move one way. You have units that are a little bit split apart, and you select them both together, and you just try and get them to go somewhere. Okay, cool. So we click them, we go forward, and yeah, the knights speed up to go in front of the two-handed swordsman again, and the two-handed swordsman, they fall back a little bit there. I'm not saying that the HD pathing is perfect. It would be nice if both units just walked directly towards the thing, but it's not that bad. Now look in DE. Like, what is this? The knights go backwards. The two-handed swordsman, yeah, one of the groups just gets separated because I guess they were a little bit too far away. Doesn't look as good. We're gonna look at a few of these tests just to really hammer it in there that the DE version is definitely a lot worse. So let's get this split off again and circle them and go. And of course the knights, they just regroup back. They regroup back before going forward. Instead of the two-handed swordsman speeding up a little bit, the knights go all the way back. And yeah, it just feels like your units are going in the opposite direction you click a lot of the time. So this next one is grabbing small groups and moving together. So if you have just a bunch of units kind of split up, as you do after big fights, and you want to just make your units go together and go towards one area, look at how it works in HD Edition. So you get them, you click them, and they kind of group up along the way. They go towards the direction you click, and they group up along the way. Beautiful. Like, that's how it should work. They eventually get into formation, and they don't do any kind of weird going back behavior. You click them forward, and then they just group up while sort of heading in the correct direction. That's how you want. Now in DE. Let's see what happens in DE. We've got a bunch of split up units. We click them and we send them forward, and they kind of go backwards a little bit, and then they sort of make their way forward. They're not even going in a straight line. Yeah, let's see it again. So we've got a bunch of dispersed units, and we go there, and they regroup backwards, and then they go forwards. So they don't even head in the right direction initially. They prioritize trying to group up sort of backwards, and then they go forward. Like, look, they go backwards, and then they go forwards. So it just feels really not great to control armies currently. Anyways, we've got focus fire with crossbowmen versus knights. So in DE, you can see how the crossbowmen, they do a little shuffle. Every time that you focus fire and then click, they all shuffle their ranks. And what that does is it means that they don't actually start moving towards where you want to click until they're done shuffling. And yeah, it doesn't really look great. Now in HD Edition, it's not that much better, but it is better. So you can see that when you click back, they do a little bit of a rotation. So they don't shuffle like in DE, but they do rotate a little bit before moving. So it's also not perfect in HD Edition, but as you can see, it's significantly better. We are gaining a little bit more distance, and well, of course, one of the things that DE does do pretty good is the melee targeting with the knights is a little bit better. So in HD Edition, you can see that the knights do bug out a little bit more and kind of not attack. But in DE Edition, the knights were a lot better at actually engaging. So that's definitely a plus for DE. But the crossbow micro is a lot better in HD Edition at this point. So looking at attack move, this is how you should micro your crossbow on DE currently, because there's none of that shuffling that happens. So you can see that we're gaining a lot of distance each time that we're moving, and that allows us to kite the knights effectively. And yeah, of course, well, a player that's actually microing the knights is going to still be able to get us around by commanding them to go a little bit more forward. But you can see that attack move looks a lot better than focus fire. So let's take a look at movement command after shooting. So what this is you shoot and then you do a movement command. And this is not really how you'd want to micro against mangonels anyways, but like you normally you do split micro, but just for demonstrative purposes, we're just going to be using the right-click method. And yeah, I mean, it's just not responsive at all. Like, you try and click one way, there's no obstructions, and they go all over the place. Now, let's see the same test in HD Edition. So we've got the same crossbowman, and we've got 2 mangonels. Again, not the greatest way that you would actually micro in a real game, but as you can see, your units at least go in the direction that you click them. So it's like we shoot, and then we go in the direction that we actually want to go. Makes sense. So let's take a look at focus fire when walking near a building. You can see that even in the HD edition, it was not that great. Your guys still do this little rotation regroup. Not great. After each step, it still means that you're not gaining as much distance as you really should be. But, I mean, okay, it's fine. The pathing wasn't great for a game that was made a long, long time ago. Now let's take a look at the DE pathing. So, we click them, they kind of move a little bit weird, and then they do this shuffle micro. So, they're just shuffling after each step. Not really great. You're still losing a lot of distance because of that little shuffle at the start. It's like the front line wants to become the back line so hard after each attack. And yeah, of course, the fact that your guys group up a lot means you're going to take some big mangonel shots. And just the fact that you're not gaining as much distance means that enemy units can hit you a lot easier. So focus fire, just really not good. It just doesn't work properly. Now let's take a look at attack move. So attack move, again, even back in HD edition, it was the superior method to do this sort of kiting micro. You can see that we gain a lot of distance each time that we do the attack move. We gain a lot of distance, we shoot, and we move. And yeah, so that's how we want it to look, sort of, is gaining a lot of distance. Your guys just actually start moving after each attack. And they don't try and do any kind of weird regroup. They just move in the direction that you click after attack moving. You can see that they kind of get a little bit out of formation. It's definitely bugged. It's not working as it should, but it's okay. Now, let's take a look at in DE. You can see that attack move, I mean, the units are moving pretty well, right? So attack move is definitely the way to go. But again, when enemies are attacking you, it messes you up. So what attack move does in DE is you attack move, and then there's a movement delay where your guys move a little bit, and then they shoot. So if you get attacked while during that movement delay, sometimes your guys just stop moving, and then they wait for the reload, and then they shoot. It just really messes with the rhythm of the attack move. So yeah, it's bugged, but it's the best way to micro your crossbowmen on current patch. So let's take a little look at some villager pathing issues. Now look at this villager. So it's trying to path to build that house, and unless you are in the correct spot, he's going to path all the way around this barracks. Now, this kind of behavior, it seems to be pretty inconsistent because depending on how you set it up, it does actually work in some situations. Now, here is just a bunch of orientations, a bunch of different things, and yeah, you can see it's not going to work for any of them. Or, well, obviously they're taking the slow path in each of these configurations. So this is just to demonstrate how there are a ton of different times when, yeah, the path just doesn't calculate the closest path. And it's inconsistent for each of them too. Like sometimes it's off by 1 tile, sometimes it's off by 2 tiles. Kind of just depends on how you have it set up. It's kind of weird. So the thing is that this kind of villager pathing was actually in the game in HD edition as well. It's not like we actually had good pathing back in the day as well. The main issue is that we just would expect that it would be fixed. Now look at this villager. He actually paths properly. See, look, like in this orientation, it actually works. He's going the fastest possible way. Okay, so take a look at this. We have this villager trying to build that house, and we had a few partially built houses on the right side there. Now, if we build palisade walls as well, it kind of it fixes the pathing because it just makes this other path a little bit too long. But if we don't have any palisade walls, no houses, he tries to go all the way around these two houses to build that one house. So yeah, something is going wrong here. Taking a look at this one, we can see that if we're halfway on the left side of this tile, he's going to path all the way to the top side of the barracks. If he's halfway on the bottom side of the tile, he paths properly. Here's just another little test for the longer paths. Seems to be pretty okay until we try to work it on this top side here. And now suddenly, like he's just pathing the wrong way, right? And it's only for like the first 4 or so that he paths wrong. And it really depends on exactly where. So the pathing is only off, or the calculation's only off by like 1 tile here. But it's definitely noticeable when you are paying attention to that. And as I said earlier, this isn't unique to DE. This was definitely in the game in HD edition as well. So taking a look at the HD version, we can see how the pathing's not perfect. It's the same kind of issue. And, well, villager movement is even worse in HD. You can tell he doesn't really hug the barracks super well. He kind of goes all over the place. So, yes, villager pathing is definitely better than it used to be in general, but there are still some major issues that really need to be fixed. But, for example, sometimes the HD pathing seems to be better. This guy is building the palisade on the right side. This is the exact path that he needs to take. I think it's like 7 tiles either way from this tile. And yeah, it works really well. But, of course, it's still inconsistent. So yeah, it feels like we just have same or worse pathing from the 2013 version of this game. And, well, I don't have the CD version to test the really old pathing. That's not really the point of this video. The point is to just show that DE pathing still needs a lot of improvements.